Welcome to the T2 Hubcast. Join Martin, Dave, Spencer and guests as they discuss all things personal and professional development. The T2 Hubcast, brought to you by the People Performance People.
So welcome back to the T2 Hubcast with me, Martin Johnson. And today I have a special guest on the show. It's none other than Andy Steele. Andy, welcome.
Hello, Martin.
So Andy and I go back, how many years is it, Andy? 20 years, 25 years maybe?
96, 97, I would say it was, wasn't it?
Yeah, well, I joined up in 99, so that's when I first met you for sure. Okay. But we say joined up because Andy and I first met in the Royal Navy, like I said, probably 99, 2000-ish. So a good 20 years ago. Andy is Hull born and bred like myself. Andy is the founder of the PATT Foundation, which has been running now for about 15 years. So has taken up the majority of his work outside of the military. Andy lived in the Far East for a number of those years, where the PATT Foundation planted how many trees? Was it 3 million, Andy?
That's right, 3 million trees across Asia.
3 million trees across Asia over 15 years. So a wonderful cause and a wonderful setup. Recently, Andy's moved back to the UK, and the PATT Foundation is a registered UK charity, and he's embarking on a brand new project back here in his hometown of Hull called One Hull of a Forest. And the idea and premise behind it, Andy, I think you could do a miles better job than me, so I'm going to let you do that in a second. But welcome to the T2 Hubcast, Andy. It's been some while we've been talking about getting you on and having a good old chat about all things, you know, forestry and the environment. But also, I think a couple of things we're going to throw into this conversation is, you know, you feel passionately about getting veterans working and transitioning into civilian life. We've done it ourselves, but it's not easy for everybody. So trying to combine that with doing great in the world and for the environment, and also supporting, you know, in the modern days, it's become more apparent, but supporting mental health and well-being as well. So you believe that the three are intrinsically linked. We're going to discuss them on this podcast. But just before we do, Andy, just give us a little bit more of an intro into what I've already said around why you went into this sort of space after the military, why you feel passionately about it, and what is the One Hull of a Forest project aim to achieve?
Yeah, sure. After leaving the forces, I was looking for a job and literally had a phone call asking if I'd be interested in a position out in Sri Lanka. And I did, I took it. And it's there that I was polluting the atmosphere, working as the deputy maintenance manager for a power station. And I was given an opportunity to move over to the forestry sector, which I did, and realized that quite easily you can have a benefit commercially, generating revenue from the forest, but also a massive effect on the environment. And a lot of traction came from that.
Oh, so it's all right, Andy. We're going to keep rolling, Andy. I think your phone went off there. You might have to set it down a little bit.
Right.
We're still in COVID-19, so we're on our mobile devices. So yeah. Carry on, Andy. Go for it.
So I relocated to Thailand, where I was working in the forestry sector, but also realized that we could have a benefit from helping the environment, but also helping people. And a group of 15 friends took a trip, a 7-hour journey actually, to the Burmese border to plant trees at an orphanage. And what we'd done is plant trees that would give that orphanage economic value from the teak trees that we planted, but we also planted a fruit orchard that would give them food. And at that point, I realized that, you know, you really could have a dynamic effect, and as where there's attraction, you do get traction, and people were interested in what we were trying to do. So that transpired to planting 3 million trees, not personally, but I might add, across Asia, working with some large-scale multinational companies, blue chips. And then I came back to the UK last year and saw the announcement around the Northern Forest and how we as an organisation could get involved with the government's initiative to plant 50 million trees between Liverpool and Hull, not along the M62, which people seem to think. It's not a Sherwood forest. and that's where the One Hull of a Forest project was born. People don't realise that Hull is the least forested city in the UK, with I think it's 2.4% woodland cover against the national average of 8.7%. So I was reading between the lines, seeing where we could fit, motivating people as well as companies to get involved. And that's then broadened the scope, as we discussed, Martin, into mental health. And there's a number of different rabbit holes that we're going down now, which are fantastic. As a veteran, as you are, you understand the challenges people face leaving the forces, and it's interesting how forestry can have an effect on that.
Yeah, absolutely, Andy. And I think that's a great story. It's a great journey that you've been on. And I think so. One of the things we're going to do for this conversation then is let's try and intertwine three different subject matters into one, if we can. I really want to know more about the forestry project, because I think that's a staggering statistic that you shared there around Hull and how it's the least forested. Is that the right word? Forested city in the country, and we know that nature and trees especially have a direct correlation to mental health and well-being and mood. And we know that also there's veterans or there's ex-military personnel coming into civilian life who struggle with the transition in terms of knowing what they want to do or what they can do and where they can serve. So I think you're trying to, if I'm correct in saying, Andy, you're trying to bring them together, because I think the One Hull of a Forest project presents the opportunity to do something good in the environment in the UK, certainly in our region, and make a difference. But it is directly connected to improving mental well-being and mental health. And it's also potentially an opportunity for veterans who are leaving their forces to be able to, contribute and have a cause. Have I explained that correctly?
You have. I think what I realised coming back, that whilst our mandate has been to plant trees, and you have afforestation and reforestation. Afforestation is planting trees on new areas. Reforestation is replanting old areas. The focus was on the environment, biodiversity, and creating wildlife habitats. And whilst that's brilliant, I realised there's quite another level of or layers we could delve into. And the first one was understanding that exposure to green spaces and getting involved in green activities has a positive effect on antisocial behaviour. And that ended up with us working with the Humberside Police Early Intervention team, and fascinating how you can engage these kids and hopefully put them on the right path whilst also reducing these antisocial behaviour issues. That in itself was fascinating, and it led me to see, right, there's a lot more to this. In Japan, they have forest bathing parks where you realize that people go to them from living in a built-up environment and a concrete jungle. It's a stressful environment, and they, as you will know yourself, you get out amongst nature, and it does have an effect on you. It really does have a calming effect and relaxing, and certainly a lot of service personnel have made a note of that. So I wanted to dig a bit deeper and see how we could bring all of those elements that you said are so intrinsically linked together. And we've put a project together that is really capturing some hearts and minds. What we're realizing that instead of just the environment, we now can have a positive effect on mental health. And ultimately, that can have a cost saving to the NHS. Some figures, Martin, actually, that are astounding for me. And there's a recent document written by an ex-colonel, Sally Coulthard. She runs the Defence Garden scheme, and she has documented the fact that the amount of service leavers and current service personnel with mental health figures has increased. I think it's 6% of current serving personnel and 17% of service leavers. And now that's down to society as a whole. We're quite open now, instead of the old military mentality of suck it up, princess, and crack on. We're a little bit more open that we may be struggling, or people may have an issue and need some help. And she's identified that nature-based therapies have a positive effect. And it also provides an angle whereby people don't necessarily need to go into an environment, a clinical environment, where their mental health is assessed. They can be out amongst nature, and there's not as much stigma attached to it. So yeah, that's been one of the second angles. And then ultimately, as this has unfolded, we now realize that we can put all of this together with some large scale planting and put a career path or a transition path for veterans into the real world and tackle the mental health issue, but also add a qualification, whether it's horticulture or tree surgery, into the mix. So it's been fascinating. And, I go back to the days of 99 then playing rugby, and to sit here now 20 years or so later, working in a completely different field is astounding. It's amazing how life unfolds.
It is. I mean, a couple of observations from what you were just saying there, Andy, from my perspective is, I went out just yesterday with the family. My wife works down the hospital in labour ward, so she worked most of the bank holiday. So we took a day yesterday and we went to North Yorkshire, and we had a day out in the forest. We did Falling Foss waterfall, which was beautiful. It was amazing. And then we went over to Ravenscar on the coast near Whitby, and we saw the seals, and we climbed down a huge hill. And it was just a day out in nature. And you know what? Me and my wife both said yesterday evening, we need to do this more, because the whole family was on a high. We had a fabulous day. We laughed, we joked. And when we got home last night, we were a bit sore and a bit, from all of the walking and the trekking and the climbing. But we had a fantastic day and our mood was lifted, and I've experienced that firsthand, and we don't do it enough in modern day life. So I think there's definitely, and as we know the science and the brain chemicals in the brain, we release those feel-good chemicals like serotonin and dopamine and oxytocin when we're out in nature with our loved ones, enjoying ourselves. So, there is the psychology behind it. And I think, the other point I was going to make on the veterans piece is me and you have both transitioned from military life into civilian life quite successfully. But I think the major thing we did, Andy, is we did it years ago. And I can't remember how long you served. How long did you serve in total, Andy? What was your time?
13 years.
So you did 13. Now I did the minimum 5, right? So I did a dog watch really, but I did the minimum 5. Now, I speak to a lot of veterans, and I've spoken to a lot of people who have transitioned over the years, into the corporate world or the civilian world. And there seems to be a cut-off point, and I think you might have just got it right on 13 years. Anything over halfway, so 22 years is what you sign up for in the military. So anything over halfway, roughly 11, 12 years, tends to, the longer you stay in over halfway, the harder the transition. Does that make sense, Andy?
Totally.
Because the more you become institutionalized. Whereas if you get out anywhere up to halfway, it's like you've made the break at the right time, where it's a little bit easier. It's not easy, but it's easier to make the transition. And I find that the most of the people who struggle are the ones who have come to the end of their natural term. They've collected their lump sum and their pension, and they're still of an age, Andy, where they're maybe around 40 to 45 years old. And it's like, I've got a hell of a lot of working life left. What now? And I find that they're the ones who struggle more with the transition. And I think if they're, it's not an exact science because anybody can struggle, but if they're the ones that can get involved in a project like One Hull of a Forest to help them with the transition, to help them in those early days, then I think that's going to be a wonderful thing. Can I ask, Andy, are you asking, is this going to be purely on a volunteering basis for the veterans, or do they get paid for their work, or how does it tend to work?
Well, that's, as it stands, we've been working closely or talking to Steve Kingdom at Hull Veterans, who firsthand has experienced the benefits of being in green spaces. Initially, what we're looking for is people to volunteer to come on the scheme once we get it launched, ultimately to get that qualification. But because of the aspects of what we're doing with the charity and a lot of carbon forestry projects, which are really capturing hearts and minds from a commercial aspect because of the drive to get to net carbon zero in the country by 2050, it will lead to employment opportunities. We're talking to a number of companies now about some large-scale tree planting opportunities. So what I need to do in parallel to getting people trained, veterans trained, is provide that link for that transition so that they can be employed to go and do the horticulture or to go and do the tree surgery work and be paid to do tree planting. I'm just going to change tack a little bit, Martin. What you see whilst the government has announced that they want to plant 50 million trees across the Northern Forest over 25 years, the funding isn't necessarily there. And you'll see things, and I'm not casting aspersions on organisations at all, but you'll see adverts from the Woodland Trust which say donate £1.50 to get a tree, or to donate for a tree, and that is the cost for a tree and a stake, and the protection. In fact, it can be a lot higher than that if you're using Tubex. They're about £1.50 each. So that donation doesn't necessarily mean that tree goes in the ground, and we as an organisation have been reliant on volunteers, and that's not sustainable. Not when you look at the Haywoods commitment. That's the Hull and East Yorkshire Woods, which is the community forest organisation for this area. They've got a commitment under the Northern Forest to plant 1.2 million trees. Now, those trees don't jump in the ground themselves. So there needs to be, from the grant making organisations, the need to facilitate the revenue on a cost per tree basis to pay people to do it, which is what I see happening. Now, if we're reliant 100% on grants, which we are, and donations, to plant trees, then we will struggle to pay people. But under the aspect now of the carbon forestry market and under the Woodland Carbon Code, companies have got a commitment to lower their greenhouse gas emissions. Therefore, the revenue streams are potentially available to pay people to do this work. So there's quite a lot of, I'll say, loose ends at this stage, but we're on the right track to getting people employed in this sector. And with the advent of Brexit, I think you may have seen the Pick for Britain announcements by the government. There's a lot of opportunity, 70,000 roles within this sector, just for people on a temporary basis. I saw another article quite a while back now with, I think it stated that overall within the agricultural, forestry and horticultural sectors, there will be a gap of 170,000 roles once we exit the EU. So there is a path there, is what I'm saying.
Absolutely. So a couple of questions, Andy, because it's fascinating for me. One of the things I've found since coming out of the military and setting up my own business in and around the Hull and Humber in Yorkshire is, certainly in the Hull and Humber, people stick together. And that's the one thing I will say about this region. Sometimes we cut ourselves off from the outside, but we absolutely stick together when it comes to business. And I think that's a great thing about our region. I'm guessing going forward is one of the plans for One Hull of a Forest to build relationships with those local businesses, the well-established businesses and the up-and-coming businesses and the public sector organisations, to sort of source partnerships and funding. Because as you rightly say, it's not there right now, and it's unachievable and unsustainable unless there is an element of funding to be able to do this. So I think that's my first question, which you can answer in a second. Are you looking to partner organisations who can also support with the funding for the project, as well as doing some of the great things that we've already discussed? And secondly, planting all of these trees in the Hull and Humber area, I guess a lot of people are going to ask the same question I'm thinking right now. Where the hell? I'm thinking like hundreds of thousands of trees, never mind millions. Where would you put them in Hull? But you've obviously got the idea of where it's all going to happen.
Okay. Well, yes, so to answer your first question then, partnering with organisations, we've done that already with a number of companies. And if the trees have been funded, they've paid then to have a volunteer team building day out planting trees. And that's great.
I love that. Yeah, I love that idea.
Whereby we've got an abundance of volunteers to plant trees. That's great. And corporates that want to get out. But obviously we have to facilitate the day. So thankfully for us, organisations have been willing to say, well, look, we'll cover a cost per head, which helps cover our administration costs. But we've just recently, and this is hot off the press, we've just signed an MOU with Hull College to support the One Hull of a Forest project. And we're talking to various other organisations. One of them is the Living with Water scheme, which is a partnership with Yorkshire Water, Hull City Council, the Environment Agency, and Hull and East Riding. They've got a flood resilience programme. Obviously, Hull is at risk. And one of the things we can do is plant trees upstream that will help with flood mitigation and flood resilience. So a lot of ongoing discussions on partnerships, but it does come down to organizations willing to go the extra mile from a CSR point of view. And that's difficult, especially in this COVID-19 and looking over the parapet post-COVID-19. The money isn't there for CSR. And that's an issue fundamentally for all charities and businesses. Now, where we've got an advantage here is what's called streamlined energy carbon reporting. There are now 18,000 companies that have to report their greenhouse gas emissions. Now, what that's leading to is the government taxing them in the future, analysing a baseline of where they sit with their emissions, and then pushing them to get down to a point in the future where they are at zero emissions. Now, that is nigh on impossible for quite a lot of companies. I'll give you an example. MKM have got 99 facilities around the UK, or 69, moving to 99. They can't go to electric vehicles because they just simply can't travel. They don't have trucks that can carry bricks around the length and breadth of the country. These vans can only go a certain mileage, and then they need to stop and recharge. So they will have a carbon footprint that they can't negate. Now, not saying that trees are the only solution, but it is one solution that kills the two birds with one stone. The CSR angle, but also will mitigate their greenhouse gas emissions. The trees can be used to remove carbon, and they can use that under the Woodland Carbon Code against their greenhouse gas emissions and tax. They will be taxed in the future. So the SECA regulation will dictate that I think it's 18,000 companies above a certain size are going to be taxed. So that's one angle that we've got where we've got a benefit, and I think that's a commercial angle there. And come on to your second point, the land. You are right. Whilst Hull's a sprawling city and it stretches into the East Riding, the focus has been within the city boundaries on the One Hull of a Forest project, but we are working further afield in the East Riding and projects on the South Bank. Quite a lot of options are popping up. So within the city, there are areas, some of them are council, some of them are private. And the last major tree planting was done by the Woodland Trust over a decade ago now by Mark Feather. Mark's one of the woodland officers for this region. And their report stated that there were 106 hectares of land available inside the Hull area to plant trees. So a quick calculation, 2,000 trees a hectare gives us 200,000 trees, which is the target for One Hull of a forest. But that's not to say that there's numerous land opportunities outside. The issue we've got in the East Riding is the soil is very fertile. So it's arable land. It's good for food production. So it's a competing priority for a farmer. Is how much can I earn growing a crop, and what will I get if I plant trees? A bit of a catch-22. There's a lot of discussion going on, way above my pay grade on some of these things, to be honest.
Yeah, absolutely. So the land is there and identified, and there's also other opportunities, like you said, from the flood protection angle. But it was a really interesting thing you said there. This is not just asking for charitable backing to do the right thing for One Hull of a Forest by local established businesses. This is actually, there is some commercial kickback for you in terms of the CSR down the line, and from a tax benefit perspective. And for some companies who are struggling to do that, this could be a way of really getting stuck into a project that makes a difference. Yeah, I like that, mate. And in terms of veterans, you mentioned veterans getting involved from a transition perspective. Would you be just targeting local veterans, Andy? So veterans returning to the Hull and Humber area, or is it a national thing? What have you had any thoughts about that?
The pilot scheme will dovetail with what we're doing in this region. But I've just come off a phone call this morning with a businessman who owns a golf course in Oxfordshire, and he understood what we were doing with the veterans community and the carbon side, and has said, look, we'd be really interested to discuss a project in the south of England. So what I saw with Sally Coulthard's project, the Defence Garden Scheme, she put the research together and was looking at launching a pilot in Ireland and then the northwest of England. We're looking at a pilot in the East Riding area, but I think it's very quickly gathering momentum and will become a national scheme. And that's not to say it's a national scheme that we would roll out. We don't have the depth to go that far. But we will find partner organisations in the various different sectors of the UK that we can work with and say, look, here's the model. It's not, because this is not commercial. There are commercial benefits from carbon and forestry for companies from a tax perspective, but we're a charity. So what we want to do is create a workable model for veterans and businesses and the local communities that can be rolled out across the UK.
Yeah, absolutely. Makes sense. Just going to move it sideways a little bit, Andy. Might be a bit of a left field question, but one of the things, I mean, you'll probably know more about this than me, having lived out in the Far East for all of those years, but one of the innovative things certain countries have done in the Far East, like Singapore, in Malaysia, etc., maybe Japan, is they've got these forest domes, they've got these rooftop forests where, because space in busy central business districts is a premium, they tend to go upwards and have forestry and plantation on roofs and in domes and all sorts of stuff to try and still create that effect. I mean, is that unachievable in a place like Hull? Is it too far-fetched? Could it work? Do you believe in them? You know, what's your thoughts on that?
Interesting and very topical. Hull College are also talking along these lines at the moment with a project they're working on. We're not party to this, but we're certainly aware of it, called Green in the Grey. And there are options for the college, the architecture of the college to be changed into a green structure, where the plants and gardens can be put on the roofs and on the walls, and changing as you come up to the statue. I think it's a William Wilberforce statue. As you come up to that, they can change that into a green area. I think that the whole Queen's Gardens is going to be redeveloped. So to answer your question, yes, it can be done in Hull, and yes, it's been demonstrated overseas, and it can work. You just have to really adopt a different attitude to how we do things and create this green architecture and living spaces. There was a project tabled by Lucy Dunhill a while ago to do the same down Whitefrigate. I think the council may have picked that project up. I'm not sure if Lucy's involved in it now, but you know, the options are there, providing the people doing the town planning and the building think about this in an early stage.
Yeah, and you think about the space on top of rooftops, you know, from in Hull that you could probably use if and it would take a bit of investment and innovation. But you're looking at St Stephen's, you look at the train station, Paragon Station, you know, you look at the new Hilton Hotel, you look at a lot of these rooftops with vast spaces where you could easily achieve that. I mean, I know we're talking about you know, putting solar panels on roofs to try and create renewable energy, but there'd just be just as much environmental benefit from putting forestry on rooftops, right? And I think that's the type of thing that potentially going forward, as space does run out, that we're going to have to do as we continue to tackle this issue.
You're not wrong, and I think we've got the built environment. The advantage we've got in a city like Hull is what's called ribbon development. The city expands outwards. And because of the population density, we're not on top of each other and needing to build up as such. So we do have those green spaces outside. But I think there's an annual shortage in the UK of 1 million homes. So we're going to constantly see more properties popping up. And that's where we need to consider the environment and not damage what's already there. And if we do take something down, put it back. Now, that is not always as easy as it sounds. Hull City Council actually have got a supplementary planning document which states that for every new dwelling, a developer should plant 3 trees on that site. If not on that site, then they need to plant them somewhere else. Now, that has been tabled as best practice in the UK, and hopefully other councils will follow suit. But the definitive there is that the developer sometimes can't always put those trees on his development, and not everybody wants trees in their gardens. So there's got to be a bit of a compromise and support projects like ours where we can find locations and plant those trees. But it's good to see a focus on these things and people taking them into due consideration.
Absolutely. You said something earlier, Andy, that that sort of I wrote down on my page as we were speaking. You said around, when we linked it back to improving mental health and an opportunity for people to get out in nature and plant trees and improve their mental health, you talked about team building days out. Now, as you know, here at T2, we do a lot of team building days for our clients, and we always take them outside for the team building. So we either hire Beverly Racecourse, for example, and we put them through a series of old school military cognitive command tasks, and it's mixed with classroom-based learning and problem solving as a team building exercise. And there's various other things that go on in the corporate world in terms of off-site team building, where they go out to forests and they've got to build a catapult in an allotted time, and the winning team, is the one who has the most functional catapult. And there's all of these wonderful different types of experiences. But it really struck a chord with me, because going out from a corporate perspective to do some team building, but genuinely doing something fantastic like planting trees instead of just building something or, having a good time. I think there could be something in that, I think there could be something in that which, and even if you've got certain groups of employees who are open and honest about the fact that they struggle with mental health, for example, that could be a better way of developing those people rather than sending them to a classroom to talk about managing mental health. So I think you're onto something there, and I think it's something me and you should explore further outside of this conversation. But I think that's the opportunity for companies to sort of participate in the process as a team building development opportunity, as well as doing great, as well as reducing the stuff you was talking about.
There's a real win-win angle there for the major companies, the large companies that have got to look at their carbon offsetting schemes. They've got the ability here to create a woodland that will service their financial requirements from a tax perspective, but create a CSR project that's not just a benefit for their employees, but will also benefit the community at large. And if their employees can be involved in the building of it, they can badge it, they can name it, and it becomes their woodland area. And their staff have got that benefit of getting out amongst nature. I think having lived in Bangkok and worked for 12 years in Bangkok, you get outside, it's a concrete jungle. I really noticed the difference when we got out in the forest. And I think that's what you sort of need here as well. Sometimes if you're working in an environment from a company point of view, it's the iceberg effect. You don't see the benefit of an employee going out into a green space, but actually the reduction in stress, anxiety, possibly depression, the benefits are massive. And I think the more companies we can get involved in that, the better, as long as they understand what's going on in the mindset and behind the scenes.
Yeah, absolutely. Love that, mate. Love that. Before we wrap this up, Andy, because we've been on almost 35 minutes already, and I could talk to you all day long. So I'm going to ask you for any final sort of thoughts or any final points that you want to make before we finish the podcast, and we'll maybe get on and do another at some point. But the one thing I just want to sort of wrap up in terms of what I've learned and observed here today is I think this is a fantastic opportunity. One hull of a forest, check it out. You have got a website as well, haven't you, Andy? So people can check it out online. But for me, it's about doing great in the environment. It's about fighting for a cause that's worth fighting for us, for our future of our companies, our children, etc. It's an opportunity to not only achieve that, but to also get veterans involved who are struggling traditionally with either transitioning from the military or who suffer with mental health. Get them involved, which would be a fantastic thing to do as well. And also for organisations, and I want to reiterate that last point, for me, it's not just about that. For organisations who, and believe me, I see this firsthand, Andy, who are spending hundreds of thousands, if not millions of pounds on tackling mental health in the workplace. We can go to classroom-based training. We can send our managers for mental health first aid training. We can have all of these different initiatives in the organisation to try and improve well-being. But this could be a really effective, different way of getting involved in something that gets your people out, gets them contributing, and improves mental health and well-being in the form of planting trees and being out in greenery. And I think that's where organisations should really look at this. Yes, there's the commercial aspect that you talked about, Andy, and I think that's important. But really the driver for it is the opportunity to really make a difference for their employees and for the local environment going forward. So I think it's fantastic. Andy, do you just want to, before you give any final points, do you just want to read out where people can contact you, find out more? Have you got a website? Is there an email address, social media, etc.? Just so if people listen to this want to reach out.
Website, which is PATT Foundation, PATT pattfoundation.org, and we're active on social media. There's PATT Foundation on Facebook, on Instagram and Twitter, and also the same for the One Hull of a Forest project. So people can reach out on any of those platforms and usually finds its way back to me.
Awesome. Any final pointers,
I think
Andy?
you summed it up quite succinctly, Martin. You covered all the aspects. I think the one thing that I will add is that we really do need to respect the environment and understand the benefits. And you mentioned it yourself at the weekend. You'd gone out with your family, and the most important thing to take from that is it's free. If you're going off your own back to do some things, it doesn't cost you anything, and the benefits to you, to your kids, and the community at large in doing this are astronomical, and we need to really put a focus on it, especially coming out of the lockdown situation. I think we really need to appreciate what we've got and enhance it.
Awesome. Couldn't have said it better. Andy Steele, I could have talked to you for hours, mate. That was fantastic. Thanks for coming on. I will publish this out onto the T2 Hub for our customers. We'll also publish it out onto our social media streams. Andy, you can have a copy as well to send out wherever you like. And hopefully people will listen and it'll drive some conversation. So Andy Steele,
appreciate
thank
it,
you very
Martin.
much,
Speak
mate.
to you soon.
Speak to you soon, and we'll be back shortly with